This is your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier coming at you live in RabbiChat, presented by the Pasadena Jewish Temple. A second, I see some friends joining in the chat right now. You too can join in the chat, whether you are on Facebook or on YouTube, on the respective Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center channels there, or joining us on Twitch. That's a cool platform that people stream video games or just chat. So whether you're with us on Twitch or on YouTube or on Facebook, you are more than welcome. If you are curious about Judaism, you are in the right place, and I can't wait to learn with you right after this brief musical interlude. So we can hear each other talk. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier. I am here on behalf of Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center. In this little program I like to call RabbiChat. We get together a couple of times a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3-ish. So we'll do better. Just still piecing all the pieces of technology together, getting all the pipes connected on the internet. And today I'm delighted to talk a little bit about this week's Torah portion, which, as I said before, is a double feature. It is Achrei Mot and Kedoshim. And you might ask, why do we have double Torah portions sometimes? Is it just because we're so darn lucky? No, that's not exactly. Maybe we are, and that's true. But it has to do with a coincidence of the lunisolar Jewish calendar, that there are actually 54 different Torah portions. And some weeks in the Jewish calendar, some years in the Jewish calendar have 50 weeks, and some years in the Jewish calendar have 55 weeks, and they accomplish that by means of a leap month and throw in some holiday readings and things like that. Long story short, some years, on longer week years, we get to read Achrei Mot and Kedoshim separately, but most years we read them together, just like in this past week we had shmushed Tazria and Metzora together. So same drill, same double feature, some action-packed Torah portions, almost no mention of communicable skin diseases. Communicable sin diseases, that's another story. Communicable skin diseases like we had last time of tzarat and those sorts of things. This week we are talking about sin. There's some sins in there, but there's also some positives. Kedoshim, I'll say, is by far my most favorite parsha in the book of Leviticus, and it's definitely up there. The first off, there's a great talking donkey story, not to spoil it for you. It's the first time I ever gave a Devar Torah was on Parshat Balak, and that was special because it was when my father, a generation at least ago, was a preacher. That was one of his favorite parshiot to give a sermon on, and so I had that connection. So Parshat Balak is up there, Yitro is up there because it's my Hebrew name, and there's all sorts of good stuff that goes on there. But along with those things, I'm going to say Kedoshim is a solid top 3. You know, some years I like it better than others, but definitely it's a good one. I just want to acknowledge some friends in here. Nawa64 and D. Willexen are joining us on the Twitch Arena. And we got some people in YouTube land as well. Ruthie Honey here is on YouTube. And Kay Dixie, nice to see both of you here. And Tammy Lynn Garrison has joined us from Facebook. So whatever platform you're on, it's cool. No judgments here. This is a diverse group, to be sure. So just stop by and say hi. Ask what questions you have that a rabbi might be able to answer, or that this personal guy might be able to answer for you. It's helpful if you have a question to put question marks on it. It helps me see in the chat scroll as it's going along. So if you have any questions about anything Jewish whatsoever, feel free to throw those into the chat. I want to give a little bit of a lesson on this week's Torah portion, so you get what you paid for here, so to make sure you do at least a little bit of learning, whether you have a question or not. And we'll get started on that in a second. I see Haunted Hideaway is joining us from Twitch. Nice to see you here, Haunted Hideaway. And just if you have no questions at all, you just want to say hi. I love to hear where people are coming from. I know some people here are coming from Southern California. I see some folks here that I know are from Colorado. Wherever you are coming from, we're delighted that you were here. Say, hi from Skokie, or hi from Poughkeepsie, or one of these other fine American towns, or not American towns. There's people I learn with from Poland and Thailand and Cyprus and all over the world. So really delighted for everybody to be here. So I want to give you a brief overview of all the great stuff that's in Achrei, Mot, and Kedoshim. And like I said, an overview of all of the stuff. It's sort of a 30,000-foot view, just so you can get a handle on where we are in the Torah. Some people regard this as kind of the center of the Torah. It's sort of the middle parshiot of the middle book. And somewhere around here is like the middle letter. They've actually figured, okay, what's the middle letter in the Torah? There's some debate about that. But, we're Jews, so we're gonna have different opinions. So this is in some ways regarded as I think it was like the belly button of the Torah, and in the sense of this is the source, this is the center of our gravity in our holy teaching. And I'll get to why that is in a minute. But first, I want to give you kind of an overview. Achrei Mot means after the death. And it's referring to Nadav and Abihu, the sons of Aharon, who perished a couple of parshiot ago, 3 parshiot ago, where they had opened up the temple for business, and immediately things went south. Some of the priests offered things they shouldn't have, and they got zapped. And so then it goes on and talks about skin afflictions for a couple of parshiot, and another, something that sounds very much like having black mold in your house or something like that. And so after that, interlude of how to stop things that spread, good lesson for our times, it gets back into this sort of narrative mode. It places us in time, and it says, Achrei Mot, after the death of Nadav and Abihu, some other stuff happened. And then it lays out various rules for the centralization of sacrifices, right? The idea that you could only make sacrifices in the place where God causes God's name to be hallowed. Meaning you can't go up and set a temple any place you want. You can't make a sacrifice any place you feel like. And in later days, the prophets talk about, well, they put a temple over here, and they put a temple over there, and there was a little shrine at the gate of every town, and blah, blah, blah. And we're going to schmeiss all that and get back to basics. And so that's a little bit of what they talk about. The whole of the, sort of the breadth of this Achrei Mot is chapters 16 through 18 of Leviticus, and then Kedoshim is 19 and 20. Also in Achrei Mot, in chapter 18, it talks about sexual taboos of the time and place of the Torah. It's various people who shouldn't have relationships, or rather who shouldn't have sexual activity with each other. It's not speaking about relationships, it's speaking about specific physical acts between people who shouldn't be having those specific physical acts. And there's some controversy in there as well that's been the subject of great debate, especially over the last several decades within the Jewish world, as we understand some of those relationships differently. And so that's another video I've talked about in that in other spaces. I won't get too deep into that right now, but I'll give you my 2 cents, just so you know where I'm coming from. And then we start with Kedoshim. Kedoshim is chapters 19 and 20, and this for me is like, I'm going to say, I want to really go out on a limb here because there's lots of good stuff in the Torah. I don't like choosing between mitzvot. But Leviticus chapter 19 is, for my money, one of the central teachings of Judaism, and possibly one of the greatest ethical codes of any religion anywhere. I'm staking my claim on that. I will die on this hill. I know people have different opinions, but for me, Leviticus 19 is the tops. And so I'll talk about that just in a second. Ruthie Honey's asking a question if we're doing a blessing. We'll do that we haven't usually done that in this broadcast, but we'll do that in a second. Let's see. Really appreciated Aviva's message of thanks on the PJTC Facebook page. So if anybody's looking at the PJTC Facebook page, check out Cantor Aviva Rosenbaum has Rosenblum. Excuse me, I know a different Rosenbaum. Cantor Aviva has posted a great video on our PJTC Facebook page. So check that out. Good stuff going on. And so, one thing, so Ruthie's reminded me often when I've studied Torah with some of my online students before, we often begin with the bracha for Torah study. And since we're talking specifically about the Torah portion, I think it's appropriate to teach that bracha here. And you can say the bracha, that means blessing, along with me. Essentially what it means is we bless God, the source of all of our blessings, for distinguishing our lives with God's commandments, specifically the commandment for Torah study together. So before I say more about the Parsha, I will go ahead and say that bracha, and you can type Amen into the chat if you like, or say Amen wherever you are, and it goes like this. And this is something we say on services on Saturday morning before we read from the Torah as well. And it goes like this: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So before we dig too deep into Kedoshim, I just want to finish up sort of the summary of what's going on. We get through this. One important thing that I missed from Achrei Mot was it sets out a ritual for Yom Kippur. And it talks about this specific ritual of, let's say, vicarious expiation. It talks about the priest, or the high priest, Aaron in the original case, or the high priest after him, would draw lots between two goats. Right, there were two goats presented to the priest. The priest would draw lots and say, okay, which goat was for which, because there were two ceremonies that happened, and picked at random. One goat would be sacrificed in the temple. The other goat would be cast off into the wilderness. It would just be, some people say it would be set free. In Mishnaic times, it said it would actually be guided to a specific place for a specific end, but it was sent away from the community. And the goat that was sent away from the community before it left, Aaron would put his hands on the goat's head and send it out, and before sending it out would kind of confess collectively all of the sins of the people of the community, and in effect kind of in confessing it in the presence of this goat would sort of be transferring it to that goat and then sending it off. Thus the scapegoat was invented. Today that is mostly metaphorical, where the ills of a particular place, people, society are kind of distanced from that place. People, society placed on a different location, or a different people or a different person, that once all those sins were transferred, the people who may have been responsible for some things have now been expiated and have pushed their guilt into some other person, place, thing, nation, entity, religion, what have you. And so that's where the idea of the scapegoat was invented. One of the things we gave the world. Wasn't that nice, and hasn't it worked out well for us? So the answer is no. So in any case, that's part of the ritual for Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, we read about that as part of our Yom Kippur Torah reading. There is also a custom of reading on Yom Kippur chapter 18. And chapter 18 is, again, a list of sexual taboos that appear in Leviticus, including the relationship between two men. Over the last several years, many congregations have kind of had the conversation and made the decision, instead of reading 18, where this is the time where we have sometimes the largest number of people at the temple together, and this is people who don't come to temple all year will come on Yom Kippur or come on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and now we have everybody's attention. What do we want to read about? And so at some point it was decided that we should read Leviticus 18, which, although adjacent to the story of Yom Kippur, has nothing to do with Yom Kippur per se. I mean, these might be some things that people did them, they would want to confess them on Yom Kippur, but it sort of stands on its own. And so some people ask the question, well, why don't we read 19 instead? And that's from Parshat Kedoshim. Yom Kippur is considered the holiest day of the Jewish calendar year? Are we going to take that holiest day and focus our time on a list of intimate relationships? And I say intimate relationships loosely because if you go through that list, most of them have to do with discrepancies of power, which would tend to favor the notion that these weren't forbidden because of the nature of the relationship. They were forbidden because they were non-consensual. And so 1822, that people get so upset about, could be understood as specifically a non-consensual relationship, which by and large the Torah is like not cool, and Jewish tradition when it comes to non-consensual relationships is not cool with that. So they asked the question, rather than go through this list, what if we read chapter 19, which begins with God saying, "You shall be a holy people, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." And then goes on to list various largely ethical commandments, how people treat each other with dignity, honoring one's parents, not standing idly by the blood of a neighbor, don't cause the blind to stumble, don't insult the deaf. And it's like God is just sort of waking us up to this notion that holiness isn't, okay, we've spent, let's say, the first 18 chapters of Leviticus talking about rituals of expiation, talking about slaughtering animals, keeping fires going, how to dispose of the ashes, what's the recipe for incense. I'm not discounting any of these things as important rituals to focus people's attention on God and holiness and regard for one another. But now we get to the part where how people treat each other is paramount. And that is called out as the essence of holiness. And so many communities, Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center included, have made the decision that instead of going through a list of sexual taboos that people were uncomfortable with back in the day, let's focus our attention on how to be holy in a positive way, how we contribute to making the world a holy place. What is our job in that? And I'll say, whenever I join a community, whether it's as a member or as a rabbi, that's one of my criteria. As I ask, and some people might think this is a picayune thing, what do we read on Yom Kippur? Do we read chapter 18 or do we read chapter 19? And when I got to PJTC and they said 19, why? What do you read? they're like, this is a conversation we had a long time ago, and 19, of course. And again, for some people that might not mean much. For me, it means the world, that we're focusing on holiness instead of focusing on a piece of the Torah that has been used to denigrate and divide holy people and holy relationships among us. And so that Pasadena has made that, that commitment, that decision. It's sort of a sine qua non for me. It's sort of it's sort of a non-negotiable. And so, of course, then of course, as soon as it's sort of that sort of like, okay, we could do high holidays together. And I'm glad we did, because we always had I say always, we did it once. We had a fantastic high holidays together the last year, and we're going to have a fantastic high holidays together this year. So my goal today was to give you kind of an overview of what's in this week's Parsha. We've got Achrei Mot, which talks about certain kinds of rituals, specifically the ritual for Yom Kippur back in temple times. It does get into, in chapter 18, a list of relations that were taboo at a time and place. We understand some of those relationships differently now. Some of those are still have these sort of power disparities that you can say withholds consent, which makes them inherently unholy. And some of those we've understood differently. The conservative movement, a little bit slower than the reform movement, but certainly, it's about time, has begun to see honoring the LGBTQIA and folks among us as people created in the image of God, and I'm very grateful for that. And we get to the central, what I like to think of as the ethical center of gravity of the Torah, and that's chapter 19. And, chapter 20 is nice too, but I really like 19 in Parshat Kedoshim. So if you have any questions about this or any other Jewish stuff, I'm going to go ahead and check the chat real quick, see what's going on here. Nice to see my friends Nawa64 and D. Willexon and K. Dixie and Ruthie is here. And let's see, I saw Tammy Lynn Garrison. Nice to see you here as well. We are, generally speaking, going to be having this show, and this is kind of a new thing for us. I was doing it multiple days a week, getting into a regular schedule, kind of, in the sense that this week it's going to be Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Pacific time. In general, that's going to be the case. I should let you know that I'm taking a couple of weeks off. This is kind of a transition point for me between being the part-time rabbi on an interim basis and being the full-time rabbi on a long-term, hopefully like till retirement basis. It's like I'm good. I found a good place. So that's going to happen, God willing, very soon. That's happening right now, and so I'm taking a couple of weeks off just to sort of mark the transition based on some very wise advice from a friend of mine. So next couple of weeks after this week, I'm going to be taking off, but I will be back here on Thursday to talk about something awesome. Really looking forward to hearing your questions, and then we'll hang out more very soon. So haven't seen any questions on here. Feel free to hit me up in the chat or comments later, and I will see those as well. Until next time, Pasadenians and Jew-curious people everywhere, peace.